Pull up a map of British place names. See those towns ending in by? Grimsby, Derby, Whitby. Now look at the ones ending in Thorpe, Scunthorpe, Cleethorpes, and Thwaite, Braithwaite, Crosthwaite. They cluster together. Almost all of them sit on the same side of an invisible diagonal line that cuts across England from the southwest to the northeast. Now here's what will haunt you. That line matches the Brexit vote. It matches the red wall election map from 2019. It matches wealth, health outcomes, even accent boundaries. And that line? It was drawn by a Roman road built 2,000 years ago, then locked into place forever by a treaty signed between an Anglo-Saxon king and a Viking warlord in the year 886. One road, two civilizations, a border that was supposed to be temporary, but somehow became permanent. This is the story of Watling Street, and how it split Britain into two worlds that still haven't reunited. The Romans landed in Britain in 43 AD with one obsession: straight lines. They didn't meander. They didn't follow rivers unless they had to. They surveyed, they engineered, and they built roads like they were drawing on a map with a ruler. Within decades, they'd laid down over 2,000 miles of paved highways connecting forts, ports, and cities. Watling Street was one of the first. It ran from the invasion beaches at Dover and Richborough, through London, up through St. Albans, and onward to Wroxeter, near the Welsh border. Some historians trace it even further north, all the way to Hadrian's Wall. This wasn't a path. This was infrastructure. A military and commercial artery designed to move troops, supplies, and tax revenue as efficiently as possible. And here's what matters. Roman roads didn't just connect places, they created them. Towns grew at junctions, markets formed at crossings. Power concentrated along these corridors. When the Romans left Britain around 410 AD, they took their government, their military, and their maintenance crews. But they left the roads, and those roads kept shaping settlement patterns for centuries after the last centurion walked away. Watling Street was too useful to abandon. It became the spine of post-Roman Britain, a ready-made highway that any ruler could use, including the Vikings. By the 860s, Britain was in chaos. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Wessex, had been squabbling with each other for generations. Then came the Great Heathen Army. This wasn't a raid. It was an invasion force, probably several thousand warriors, led by sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. They landed in East Anglia in 865, and within a decade they'd conquered almost everything. Northumbria fell, East Anglia fell, Mercia fell. By 878, only Wessex remained, and even that was hanging by a thread. King Alfred of Wessex had been driven into hiding in the Somerset marshes. He was, quite literally, hiding in a swamp while Vikings occupied his kingdom. But here's where the story turns. Alfred launched a guerrilla counterattack. He rallied what remained of the Wessex army and defeated the Danish king Guthrum at the Battle of Edington in 878. It was a decisive victory, but not a total one. Alfred couldn't drive the Vikings out of Britain. They were too numerous, too entrenched. So he did something that would shape the next 1,000 years of English history. He negotiated. The Treaty of Alfred and Guthrum, finalized around 886, was a partition agreement. It acknowledged a simple reality. Neither side could destroy the other, so they drew a line, the treaty's exact words. First, as to the boundaries between us, they shall run up the Thames, and then up the Lee, and along the Lee to its source, then in a straight line to Bedford, and then up the Ouse to Watling Street. Watling Street, the Roman road. Everything northeast of that line became the Danelaw, territory under Danish law and custom. Everything southwest remained Anglo-Saxon. This wasn't supposed to be permanent. It was a ceasefire line, a pragmatic compromise between exhausted armies. But here's what Alfred couldn't have known. He had just drawn a border that would never fully disappear. The Danelaw wasn't just a political zone. It was a legal, linguistic, and cultural transformation. The Vikings didn't come alone. They brought families, settlements, and an entire administrative system. They divided Yorkshire into thirds, called ridings, from the Old Norse word Thrithjungur. Those ridings persisted as administrative units until 1974. They replaced the Anglo-Saxon hundred with the Viking wapentake. They established the 5 boroughs, Leicester, Lincoln, Nottingham, Stamford, and Derby, as semi-independent power centers. And they changed the language itself. Words you use every day came from Old Norse speakers in the Danelaw. Sky, window, egg, knife. The pronouns they, them, and their. Even the word law itself is of Viking import. Look at a map of English place names today. Towns ending in by, that's Old Norse for farmstead or village. Thorpe means new village. Thwaite means clearing. They cluster overwhelmingly in former Danelaw territory. 1,000 years later, you can still trace the boundary by reading road signs. Now you'd think this divide would fade over time. The Anglo-Saxons eventually reconquered the Danelaw. England unified. The Normans invaded in 1066 and imposed a whole new ruling class. The political line should have dissolved. It didn't. What happened instead was more insidious. The economic and cultural patterns that formed along the Danelaw boundary, they just kept reinforcing themselves. The North had different inheritance customs, different farming practices, different legal traditions. Even after Norman law unified the courts, local customs persisted. Landholding patterns in former Danelaw areas remained distinct for centuries, and when the Industrial Revolution hit, it landed on the exact same map. Coal is not evenly distributed in Britain. The major deposits sit in South Wales, the Midlands, and, crucially, across the north of England. Yorkshire, Lancashire, County Durham, Northumberland. These areas had something the agricultural South didn't: cheap energy. Between the 1660s and 1750s, before the Industrial Revolution officially began, the share of Lancashire's workforce in textile manufacturing doubled from 15% to 30%. Meanwhile, older manufacturing regions in the South actually deindustrialized. Industry migrated north, following the coal. By 1850, the Manchester area was producing roughly 40% of the world's cotton textiles. Liverpool had exploded from 34,000 people in 1773 to over 78,000 and climbing. Sheffield made steel. Birmingham made everything. The North became the engine room of the British Empire. The South became something else: the administrative center, the financial hub, the home of the aristocracy, and the civil service. London grew not as a manufacturing city, but as a command center, managing money, government, and empire, while northern factories actually produced things. You'd think industrialization would have unified Britain under a common economic model. Instead, it created 2 different economies, 2 different class structures, and 2 different political identities, running along almost exactly the same line that had separated Viking law from Saxon law 1,000 years earlier. And then, the factories closed. The decline started slowly after World War I, accelerated in the 1960s, and then crashed in the 1980s. Between 1979 and 1983, under Margaret Thatcher's first government, Britain lost over 2 million industrial jobs. Manufacturing as a share of GDP had been falling since 1970, but the Thatcher era accelerated the collapse. Shipyards shut down, steel mills closed, mines were abandoned. The communities built around those industries, entire towns whose identity was, "we make things," found themselves without a purpose. The pain wasn't evenly distributed. Northern industrial towns that had boomed in the Victorian era suddenly became symbols of decline. Meanwhile, London's financial sector boomed. The Big Bang deregulation of 1986 turned the city into a global powerhouse. The gap widened. In the decade after 2008, government spending on public transport was roughly 2.5 times higher per capita in London than in the north. Investment, opportunity, and population all flowed southward, draining former industrial regions of young professionals while leaving behind aging populations and declining services. The UK developed the largest regional inequality of any comparable economy in Europe. And then came the vote. June 23, 2016. The Brexit referendum. London and the Southeast voted Remain, areas integrated into the European economy, full of professionals with international connections. The North, the Midlands, former industrial Wales, they voted Leave. Political scientists called it a geography of discontent. Voters in deindustrialized regions, left behind by decades of London-focused growth, used the referendum as a protest vote. Not against Europe specifically, but against a system that seemed to have forgotten them. Then came the 2019 election. The Red Wall, constituencies across the North and Midlands that had voted Labour for generations, collapsed. Towns that had never elected a Conservative MP in living memory suddenly flipped blue. Boris Johnson's government promised levelling up, a phrase that implicitly acknowledged what everyone already knew. Britain was divided, and the North was on the losing side. But here's the twist that keeps historians awake at night. If you overlay the 2016 Brexit vote on a map of the Danelaw, it's not a perfect match, but it's close, unsettlingly close. If you overlay the 2019 Conservative gains on that same map, the pattern holds. The industrial North, the service economy South, the cultural divide, the political divide, they all track, roughly, along a boundary that was established when a Roman road became a Viking border over 1,000 years ago. This doesn't mean Watling Street caused Brexit. That would be absurd. What it means is more subtle and more disturbing. Geography creates patterns, and patterns persist. The Romans built roads where it made military and economic sense. Those roads shaped settlement. Settlement shaped culture. Culture shaped law. Law shaped economics. Economics shaped politics. One choice, where to lay a road, echoing across 40 generations. This isn't unique to Britain. Italy's north-south divide traces back to different medieval kingdoms. Belgium's linguistic border follows a Roman administrative line. The American blue wall of northern states maps onto infrastructure patterns from the 19th century. Ancient infrastructure doesn't just move goods. It creates identities, and those identities, once formed, are almost impossible to erase. Britain's leaders keep promising to fix the divide. Leveling up. Northern powerhouse. Regional investment. But the HS2 high-speed rail project, which was supposed to finally connect the North to London with modern infrastructure, had its Manchester leg cancelled in 2023. Northern leaders called it a betrayal. Meanwhile, the fundamental economic patterns haven't changed. London remains the center of gravity. The South remains wealthier. The North remains resentful. The line is still there. It was there before the Vikings, in the shape of Roman military planning. It was there when Alfred and Guthrum signed their treaty. It was there when coal-powered factories transformed the landscape. It's there now, visible in election maps and health statistics and property prices. Watling Street isn't just a road, it's a scar, and scars don't fade on their own. If you found this fascinating, you should see what happened when a single river created two completely different versions of Germany, and how that divide is still visible on satellite photos at night. See you in the next one.